అందరికీ నమస్తే అండి. నా పేరు అనిల్. నేను హర్షణీయం అనే పాడ్కాస్ట్ కపుల్ ఆఫ్ అదర్ ఫ్రెండ్స్తో కలిసి రన్ చేస్తాను. అట్లనే ఐఎమ్ ఇన్ టీమ్ ఛాయా ది లాస్ట్ 5 years. ఈరోజు పీటర్ కాన్స్టాంటైన్ మనతో ఉన్నారు. పీటర్ కాన్స్టాంటైన్కి ఇంటర్వ్యూ ఇంగ్లీష్లో జరుగుతుంది. తర్వాత అది ఆడియో ఛాయా పాడ్కాస్ట్లో వస్తుంది ఒక 3-4 daysలో. అట్లానే ఇంగ్లీష్ ట్రాన్స్క్రిప్షన్ కూడా విల్ మేక్ ఇట్ అవైలబుల్ అక్కడ. సో ముందర ఒక చిన్న ఇంట్రడక్షన్ ఇస్తాను, తర్వాత కొన్ని ప్రశ్నలు నేను తయారు చేసుకొచ్చాను, అవి ఆయన అడుగుతాను. ఇప్పుడు ఆయన రాసిన ఒక పుస్తకం పర్చేజ్డ్ బ్రేడ్ అని ఇంగ్లీష్లో రాసిన పుస్తకం కూడా ఛాయా తెలుగులోకి తీసుకొస్తుంది నెక్స్ట్ ఇయర్. అందరికి క్లియర్గా వినబడుతుంది కదా నేనేం చెప్తాను. సో లేటర్ నేను ప్రశ్నలు అడిగిన తర్వాత వీ విల్ లీవ్ ది ఫోరం ఓపెన్, అప్పుడు మాట్లాడచ్చు ఆయనతో, రైట్? సో ముందర పీటర్ కాన్స్టాంటైన్ ఆయన గ్రీస్లో చదువుకున్నారు, లండన్లో పుట్టారు, గ్రీస్లో చదువుకున్నారు. తర్వాత ఇప్పుడు అమెరికాలో యూనివర్సిటీ ఆఫ్ కనెక్టికట్లో ట్రాన్స్లేషన్స్ ప్రొఫెసర్గా ఉన్నారు. ఇది కాకుండా వరల్డ్ బుక్ ఆఫ్ పోయట్రీస్ అని ఆయన ఇప్పుడు పబ్లిషింగ్ హౌస్ పెట్టి దాంట్లో 2022 నుంచి 37 పోయిటరీ పుస్తకాలు తీసుకొచ్చారు. అక్రాస్ అవన్నీ ఇంగ్లీష్లోకి ట్రాన్స్లేట్ అయినవి. ఇది బ్రీఫ్ బ్యాక్గ్రౌండ్. ఇది కాకుండా ఆయన 10 లాంగ్వేజ్ల్లో, అంటే జర్మన్, ఇటాలియన్, ఫ్రెంచ్, రష్యన్, స్లోవీన్, లిథియనియన్, ఏన్షియంట్ గ్రీక్, మోడర్న్ గ్రీక్, వీటన్నిటిలో ఒక లాంగ్వేజ్ నుంచి ఒక లాంగ్వేజ్లోకి, తర్వాత ఇంగ్లీష్లోకి డిడెమిస్ అని ఏంటమ్మా సాంస్క్రిట్ పరిచయం ఉంది ఆయనకి. అది కాకుండా అర్వనీతిక అని ఒక లాంగ్వేజ్ ఉంది, అది ఆల్మోస్ట్ ఎక్స్టెంట్ లాంగ్వేజ్. దానికి ఒక డిక్షనరీ రాశారు, అది గ్రీస్లో మాట్లాడుకుంటారు. అది దాని గ్రామర్ మీద కూడా ఒక పుస్తకం తీసుకొస్తున్నారు. తర్వాత యూనివర్సిటీ ఆఫ్ reclamations is University of Oxford. Which university you are working for? Reclamations.
Cambridge University.
University of Cambridge తోటి రీక్లైమింగ్ ది లాంగ్వేజెస్, అంటే ఏవైతే చనిపోయిన భాషలు ఉంటాయో వాటి గురించి అంతా కూడా రిక్లమేషన్ ఆఫ్ లాంగ్వేజెస్ అనే దాని మీద పుస్తకం రాస్తుంది. సో ఇప్పుడు ప్రశ్నలు ఆయన్ని నేను అడగబోయేది ఆయన చిన్నప్పటి ఆయన ఎక్స్పోజర్ ఎట్లా ఇన్ని లాంగ్వేజ్లు అనేది ఆయన మాటల్లోనే మనం తెలుసుకున్నాము. దాని తర్వాత ఐ విల్ టాక్ అబౌట్ ట్రాన్స్లేషన్స్ గురించి కొన్ని ప్రశ్నలు అడుగుతాను. ట్రాన్స్లేషన్స్ అయిపోయిన తర్వాత పర్చేజ్డ్ రైట్ గురించి ఒక 2 ప్రశ్నలు ఉంటాయి. తర్వాత వీ విల్ లీవ్ ది ఫారం ఓపెన్ టైం, రైట్? సో వెల్కమ్ పీటర్, వెల్కమ్ టు హైదరాబాద్, వెల్కమ్ టు ఇండియా. You have been here for the last 1 week or so?
For 1 week.
1 week, yes. So how is India treating you?
I will say Delhi was difficult, but Hyderabad is wonderful. For me, it's almost like a homecoming.
No, I wanted to
I heard so much about Hyderabad. So
yeah,
and it's a bit more modern than I thought it would be.
Okay.
From the old photographs.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful city.
Okay. Now, before we get into your early childhood and your education and all that, you have a connection to Hyderabad too. What is your connection to Hyderabad?
Well, my grandfather's second cousins, so a very distant connection, had married. There were 2 of them. One who you probably know from the great hospital here, Nilufar
Hospital.
Married Muazzam Jah, and who the younger son of the Nizam, the last Nizam, and then Durushavar, who married Azam Jah, who was the older, and so they had married in 1930. So we're talking about ancient history in a sense, but they were Turkish because my family on my father's side is Turkish, and I heard a lot of stories all my life, but particularly from my uncle who in New York, who was very, very close, and who was very close to Durushavar. So many stories about Hyderabad and the villas and the palaces where they lived, and the Nizam's strange ways, strange and fascinating ways. So, and I'm going to try and find out in the next few days to what extent all that is true or not.
Yeah.
But it is almost like a homecoming in that sense, because when you've heard all your life about these stories and these places.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you had a very interesting childhood, so to say. You're born and brought up in London, and then you went to Greece for schooling, and you were exposed to many, many languages. So my first question has two parts. The first part is where, what and all the languages that you got exposed to, and which way? How was the childhood in that sense? And the other part is how that influenced your career today into translations.
Well, so I was born in London, and my father was British, but of Turkish and Greek background, and my mother Austrian, and I will say the marriage wasn't very successful, and the reason I'm saying that it has a linguistic reason. So my mother spoke only German. She did not want to speak anything else, which of course helps, but it's not very good for a family situation when the parents don't speak with one another. And my father insisted, there seems to be a beep here. Yeah, so German and English came immediately in that sense. Then the second thing was, of course, then Greek, growing up in Greece. I went to a British embassy school at the time, which was a problem. It was we were beaten for speaking Greek, those of us who could, and very few could. Everyone was English, blonde, freckles, So I didn't really fit in there. So that was not a good experience, but there we go. And when my parents divorced, we ended up sort of as illegal aliens in Greece, and we lived in an area outside Athens where they spoke Arbanitika, which is one of the native languages of Greece, and also Romani, which is an Indian language, in fact, from the Gypsy language, as it were, which is amazingly similar in many ways to Sanskrit, lots of words. Things like Trishul for cross, because they're very, very Christian, but they say Trishul, which I think means
Trishul.
trident, right?
Yeah.
So things like that.
Romani. The gypsy మాట్లాడుతున్నారు.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that has quite a strong Indian substrata. Yes, and then after that, when I went to high school, it was an international school. So there, the classes were in Russian. So that's where I learned Russian. And interesting enough, also Afrikaans, because in the 70s, lots of Greeks came back from South Africa, came back, and they only spoke Afrikaans or English. So the school was suddenly flooded with Afrikaners, and they started giving classes and doing O-levels and A-levels in Afrikaans. So anyway, that was partially. So then how did I translate into work? Well, when I started translating, these languages were there, particularly Russian, of course, and then German, my mother tongue. So the very first book I did was Thomas Mann's short stories, unknown ones. So that nobody knew about Thomas Mann, the great German writer who got the Nobel Prize. But there were 6 stories that nobody knew in Germany and that had not been translated that I sort of found. So that caused a bit of a sensation. And then the next book was the Anton Chekhov stories, again, also unknown stories by Anton Chekhov, the great Russian writer who wrote very many stories, over 700 stories. So even today, there are still stories that have not been translated that people don't know about, which is great because it's a wonderful treasure trove of literature. So it is connected like that.
Yeah. Yes. Now, one of the first books that you translated is what we have Bombay, the city of Bombay, right? We have what is called Tapori language. Tapori language is where on the street, what they speak.
Oh, yes.
Interestingly, you translated the book which is based on Japanese street language. Can you please take us through?
Yes, so the very, very first book I did was called Japanese Street Slang. And that was in the 80s, 1980s, when Japan had become suddenly very, very big. Everyone was interested in Japan, Japanese culture. But there were no language books that really taught you how to speak the language, let's say, naturally. Everything was very official, and people were wondering why Americans or British people can't really learn proper Japanese. So the book was like an antidote toward that. It started off with the idea of just doing natural language, but then I got carried away and it became more and more like the language of drugs, the language of prostitution, the language of this and that, and sort of turned it into, and then did a whole series. I also did Japanese slang uncensored, which went all the way, crime and everything. But again, with this linguistic interest, I just wanted to do something that hadn't been done before. Let's say capture part of the language that had not been written down. Because it's important. Language is language, I think. You know, it's almost like thinking to oneself, either for Hindi or Telugu or Marathi, that you can only have the official clean language. You mustn't, bad words must never be written down. Well, I think they need to be, so that everyone knows,
Absolutely. Now, we will be on the languages for some time. And then the next interesting work that you have done, which I mentioned in my intro too, is about Arvanitika. You made a dictionary for that. Please introduce us to the language of Arvanitika and tell us about the work that you have done.
Well, so if we think about India, which has, I think, hundreds of languages, one can say.
Yes.
And there are the official languages and the non-official languages, and then languages that are in trouble, and languages where there's only a few speakers left who are maybe 80, 90 years old. And when they die, the language is gone. And so it's a tragic situation. And so India, I think, is one of the richest places linguistically. But Europe also has that. In Greece, for instance, there are 6 or 7, depending how you count. Let's say there are 7 indigenous languages of Greece that are not related to Greek, but no one ever talks about it. It's probably news. Even if you've visited Greece, you might never have heard of that. In fact, some Greeks don't know about it, which is kind of interesting. So Arvanitika is a language spoken in Corinth, which is south of Greece, and on some of the islands. And when I say spoken, it really was spoken. My generation are the last people who can still sort of speak it. And even though I'm not technically Greek, I mean, my grandmother was Greek, but not from Greece. My stepfather's family spoke that language, so it became like a family language. And in the 70s, it was still children were speaking it. It was spoken, not fully, but it was there. But suddenly, I realized one day in the 1990s, it was almost like an apparition, that the language, no one was speaking it anymore. And then when my uncle died in 2017, I suddenly realized that there's no one to speak it with anymore. That's it.
Yeah.
So that's part of the problem with language death. And I think people around the world, and in India too, thank God, I think people are going to villages and trying to save the language to the extent that they can. And unfortunately, not every language, but some at least. So that's the kind of work, like trying to save things. I translate into Arvanitika children's books so that children can read the language, maybe. Not that they do, but anyway. And write poetry in it as well. For PEN International has a sort of an indigenous language drive, like to try and save these languages and to get people to write. And I would say if they didn't have it, I wouldn't have written it. Yeah, so it is a trigger to write these things.
So you wrote poetry and you have done some translations also in Arvanitika.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Now again, tell us about this reclamation of languages, your recent project. At what stage are you in now?
Well, so the reclamation project is so it's a book for Cambridge University Press. It's not going to be a very big book, and I'm not going to make it very jargony, very technical. But the idea is going to be to go around and look at communities, indigenous communities, maybe, not maybe, definitely, whose languages were extinct 50 years, 100 years, 200, 300, 400 years ago, and they're trying to bring the languages back in whichever way they can. And different communities have different ways of doing it. So, for instance, the Wampanoag of America, in Massachusetts. In fact, the language used to be called Massachusetts language. They have a Bible from 1630, and they have a few word lists. So linguists have taken the Bible and have taken out all the language and have recreated grammar from what they've seen in the Bible, the vocabulary from what's in that Bible, and have created the language through that medium. It's quite interesting, I think. Now, the first generation of children who speak the language naturally because their parents only spoke this artificial language to them. That's one example. Another example that interests me is like Palawakani, which is a language of Tasmania. So it's the Aboriginal language of Tasmania. The way they have recreated the language is taken words from 14 or 15 different extinct languages of Tasmania and threaded them together and speak English, but instead of saying, hello, my name is, so the grammar is the same, but the hello and the my and the name and the is are from these different languages. So as I was saying earlier, imagine if in India, for instance, something happened and everyone forgot the language. Hindi, Urdu, Marathi, everything gone, gone, gone. And 400 years from now, we have a few word lists, we have a Bible, we have something, and we say, okay, I use this Telugu word for man, I use this Tamil word for woman, I use this Oriya word for hello, and we just put that together and we have a language.
No,
so
the
it's very artificial.
The way we are going, it's possible in India.
Sorry?
The way we are going, it's possible in India.
Anyway, so maybe that's an idea for future generations. I don't know. I mean, I think that's one of the more, Palawakani is one of the more extreme examples. And one might ask, is it a clever thing to do? Is it crazy? Like, why do it? So this book is going to look into how it's done by different communities and what the reasons maybe are, for doing it.
No, we will move on to your translations. One of the interesting points that you mentioned, you talk a lot about, is the author and translator fit. And you said that you have translated Chekhov, you have translated Babel and all that. You said I can translate Chekhov, but not Kafka. Please tell us about it.
Well, so Kafka, ist ein bisschen schwierig, a little bit difficult. And I say this as we have a German specialist in the audience. Actually, the problem with Kafka is that he looks so simple. Everything is so simple and beautiful. So people are drawn to him and let me translate him. But with every sentence, I find there's 4 or 5 things happening that you need to notice, that you might not. And I can't do 4 or 5 things in a sentence, at least not successfully. And as I'd like to do successful translations, I would never translate Kafka. That's one moratorium. So I think, for those of you who are interested in translation, one bit of advice would be to try and understand what your I don't say limits, but what your range is, maybe. Now, that telling students that might not be the cleverest thing, because students have to try and go across their range, right, to figure out what it is. But I think ultimately, a clever thing to do is not, for me personally, is to understand that if I could do Kafka, I'm going to have trouble. And I might get away with it, but maybe certain critics like Kutsi, the South African critic, might start pulling my translation pieces in the press. Well, which, by the way, all publicity is good, so it's not a bad thing. So yeah.
You have to try a couple of failed translations too.
Sorry?
You have to try a couple of failed translations too to get good publicity.
Well, yes. So sometimes what happens with translations is that people have old. I think this. Yeah. Let's say I might have an old Kafka translation that I really love, and if there's a new one, I hate it because it's not what the old one is. So that can happen as well. But we talked earlier about the problem that Hoffman, who
Yeah.
you've interviewed, had with, in fact, Kutsi pulling him to pieces. That was not a bad thing. I mean, the book sold a lot because people wanted to see what it was. People discuss him, people teach him because of that. So I recommend bad reviews. It's not a bad thing. Yeah.
But now, the other one you mentioned is about, first thing is about the author and translator, right? And the other one is, there are certain limitations too. What you can translate, what you cannot translate. You talked about certain racial things. You were talking about an Afrikaans poet whom you couldn't translate it to English, being a white man. Right?
Yes, in America, that's very much of a question and has been in the last couple of years. It started with a big controversy when Amanda Gorman, who is a African American poet, vetoed a white Dutch woman who translated her. So even though she'd already done the whole book, she was fired, which caused a scandal. So this was a prize-winning Dutch translator, but Amanda Gorman said, I want a black Dutch translator. I'm black, only black can translate me. So that was what she had said, and that caused a big problem. And it turned into a big scandal in America, and much more of a sensitivity, which maybe one can argue positively or negatively, but it came to a point that one of my favorite South African poets, who is a black South African, Ronelda Kamfer, and a nice name, Kamfer, as well. And she is very, she fights. She's a very, very aggressive poet. So I could translate it into German and into Greek. So I did those two books, but not into English because being an older white male translating a young African woman is just not acceptable. I don't know if that's a phase, if it's going to change, but in America they become quite sensitive as to who translates whom. Actually, maybe afterward, if we get a chance to talk, it'll be interesting to see what your views are on that as well. Whether that's something that is, whether it's sensitivity or it's limiting. My view, I would say straight away, is limiting because Gorman had an excellent translator, and she wanted an African Dutch. She did the same in Greece. She wouldn't allow the translation unless it was an African who translated into Greek. And I was saying maybe Chaaya wants to translate her, but will you find an African who can translate into Telugu? I don't know. Probably not. So it's not such a good idea, really. Yeah.
Now moving on to your publishing, right? The world poetry of books, right? You started this in 2022, 2019.
No, actually, well, in a way, yes. 2017 was the start. Mm-hmm. Then came the pandemic. So by 22, we had 5 books after 5 years.
Now, please explain what exactly you do in this publication.
So World Poetry Books is the only publisher in America that does that publishes books that are only translations and only poetry. So no poetry written in English. It's only translations. And so it's a new press, and we now have 40 books, 39.
40.
39 actually.
Yeah, okay.
But we're going to put a few more.
Yeah.
And Jagur, who's an Indian poet, who I don't know how well known he is, actually. I've heard that he's not that well known, but in Matt Rake's translation, it's quite spectacular, and it's been listed for the shortlisted for the Derek Walcott Prize.
What's the poet name again?
Jagur.
Jagur.
Yes.
Jagur, Hindi poet.
Yes.
Clyde Walcott Prize and popular. Yeah. No, not. Yeah.
I'll send you the book. You can see.
Yeah. That would be nice. Nice. Now we'll move on to the. Now I have one more question regarding translation. I'll ask you in the. That would be my last question on translations. Now we'll move on to your novel, Purchase Bride. That is your first English novel, which you wrote in 2022. You have been, I think, almost 40 years you have spent in translation. Your career in translation
Yes.
is for about 4 decades.
Yes.
What made you write Purchase Bride?
So The Purchase Bride is a book about my Turkish grandfather, a cousin of these of the Nilüfer and the Rüşüvar and the Nizam. Second cousin, third cousin. I mean, these families are very big families, right? So, but I wanted to figure out. So my grandfather was an older man when my father was born in 1914. My father was born, and my father was an older man when I was born. So it stretches back a long time. The novel was set in 1909, when my grandfather purchased my grandmother as one of the women for his household, which at the time was quite typical, at least in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire, before it became a modern-day Turkey. So the idea was to sort of write a book and figure out this big problem in the family, like when your grandmother was purchased, and different people have different approaches. Like my father felt that my grandfather had done a great thing because she was very poor, he was very rich, so it's wonderful, he saved her. But what was behind that is what I wanted to know somehow. So it took me about 20 years to write it, not because because I was writing bit by bit, but it was like a quest to sort of find out this secret, not secret, well, yes, secret in the family. And that was what drove. And that's what the book is about, the purchase. It starts with the purchase and how she was brought in from the outside the Ottoman Empire into Turkey, into Constantinople, and how all that happened.
It's almost happened 100 years ago, right? Yes.
In 1909, yes.
1909.
So it's more than
How
that
could
now.
you gather all those details? What kind of research went into the book and writing the book?
Well, first of all, family information, I would say. Then a little bit of historical research as well. And it's a novel, so it's not that it's a biography or a memoir. I just wanted to recreate it. I showed it to my father, who said that that's exactly how it happened, which was strange because I don't think that could have been, because I changed certain places. But for him, it was very representative. I think my grandfather in that novel does not necessarily come across as very positive, but my father thought he did. So it's interesting how different readers will read things in different ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I don't want to give any spoilers, so I'll move on to my last question. What does translation mean to you personally? Forget about critics, forget about sales, forget about readers and all that. What does it mean to you personally? This is my final question.
I'm very interested in literature and what other people write, which is why I think I'm more drawn to translation than to writing my own work. So I'm interested in what Thomas Mann wrote or what Chekhov wrote, both the language, because I'm drawn to language. I think it's just a fascinating thing, but also drawn to literature and seeing how things are and trying to recreate it. And of course, now in modern translation theory, there's a whole new idea of the translator not being so invisible anymore. That the translator should be there, with Venuti and his ideas of, and this is maybe a very simplified way of saying it, but of the translator, it's time for the translator to be there. All of these things are quite fascinating. I was thinking about translation, but also doing it. Language, so language driven. And language learning, because of course, when you translate, you learn. So it's a great way of connecting to a language and seeing how it works, its inner workings, and seeing the masters at work, like the major writers, what they do with the language, and you profit from that.
Now, I finished my set of questions, so you can ask any regarding the novel, or translation, or translation of poetry, anything. Always open.
In Greek art, how your name changed to Peter?
I'm sorry?
He's
Greek art took
he's asking you about the ancestry, your ancestry. Yeah.
So my father wanted to be British, very important. So his father, so my father was born as Tahir Mehmet, which didn't last. So by the time they left Turkey, it had become Constantine Theologides. So my name is Peter Constantine Theologides. So it was like taking on a Greek nationality, and through being from the colonies from Cyprus, it stepped over into being British. So within 2 generations, we went from Mohammed bin Tahir, right, to Konstantinos Theologides to Peter Constantine. Yeah, so that's the story. I mean, there's absolutely no British DNA whatsoever. I mean, except colonial, and that's how that is. It's trying to wipe out the past. And I think this is why I wanted to write The Purchased Bride as well, to sort of see what makes someone so desperate to get away, from something like that.
have you changed your ancestry or religion as well? Religion or have you changed your religion as well?
Have I changed my region, did you say?
Religion.
Oh, religion. I'm sorry. Yeah, I couldn't hear from the microphone that well. Well, I'm not a very religious person, but I was baptized in Vienna as a child. So I'm a Viennese Catholic, Römisch-Katholisch, but not practicing. Yeah. So yes, the religion went as well. Yeah.
I was just wondering, I have similar questions, but in the context of your background and in the context of you working in so many languages, because not only do you know these languages, you know them well, and delve into works of various writers. How has that changed your perception of yourself and your identity? So you do say that you feel at home here because you do have ancestors from Hyderabad, but that is happening across the world, across the dozen languages that you work with. How has that changed your identity?
Well, that's interesting. So I would say as a child, I thought I was British because it was very important for my father. I don't know if that is an experience, a colonial experience that also has happened in India with some families. Let's say people maybe of mixed family who try to hide and really try to move away from that. But that was definitely the case there. So I think as a child, that was one thing. Definitely not Greek, because Greek was forbidden in the house by my father. And as I mentioned, I used to be put in detention in school for speaking, because I was the only one at the time. I will also say, despite having a British passport and having been born in England, the first year they wouldn't allow me into St. Catherine's British Embassy School in Athens, because you had to be DNA British, not just colony British. So no Indians allowed, no Cypriots allowed, no Greeks allowed, British, red hair, freckles, blonde. That was it. It was terrible. It was terrible. And I will say, when I read Passage to India as a teenager, I was shocked because it was exactly what I saw there. So that made me turn away from wanting to be British or feeling British, because it was also always a rejection. you know. I was going to use a word that maybe I'm not allowed. Actually, it's not allowed in England, although people have always used it. I'll spell it, W-O-G, right? They used to call me that. So, yes, then when I was 17, I went to Austria for 2 years, but I couldn't get a work permit, even though my mother was Austrian, because you could only get that from your father. Strange thing, but there we go. So I thought I was Austrian, but then that didn't work out either, and then I immigrated to America. So I've lived in America now for 42 years. I still don't quite sound American, I don't think. So, I mean, identity question, that's kind of strange. I sometimes wonder why that would be, because I should really sound like I'm from there. So I don't know, I'm meandering around, but I don't know if that touches on what you asked.
Well, it shows that you have traveled.
And issues, right, yes.
Traveled in not geographically alone, but traveled in spaces.
Yes, and I would say with Arbanitica, that language which now practically nobody speaks, I mean, I'm seen as a sort of a poster boy or poster man, as one might say, of that language. Maybe, I mean, I'm hoping the next project to do is a grammar, because we don't have one, in an attempt to save it for future generations. If somebody wants to do language reclamation in 50, 60 years, that there's at least something there for people to learn. Yeah.
So how does that compare to Esperanto? Because that is also a created language.
Well, Arbanitica is a natural language. It was spoken indigenously, that language. The other languages that I'm going to work on, in other words, as an academic project, language, it's called Indigenous Language Reclamation, the book will be. It's going to look at those different communities, and there, I think that's a very good point. It is like Esperanto in many cases, because, well, Palawakani, definitely the language of Tasmania, where they've taken different words and then put them together in a simplified way. Other places like Southern Pomo, which is a language of California, they try to learn the language, but it's so complicated that the linguists offer them a pidgin. Pidgin language meaning simple, like me go, you go, me no want, you don't want, this sort of thing. So that people can talk it and learn it quite easily. So different communities have tried different things, but imagine, let's say, if Telugu was not spoken at all, but one can learn it, can you imagine a group of British people trying to learn Telugu and to speak it like a mother tongue? Very difficult, no? I mean, and this is the kind of problem that these communities have, because English is their mother tongue, and now they're trying to learn languages with a very different grammar, different sounds, very complex, different culture. How do you do that? So in a sense, it's a losing battle, but many of these communities have also accepted that and said, well, what we speak is Neo-Mohegan or Neo-Massachusetts. It's a new Massachusetts. It's not the old language. We know it's not the old language. So yes, very much like Esperanto. Artificial. Yeah.
I have quite a few questions actually, but I'm going to try to give you one. So the first one is, as I'm also a foreign translator from Telugu to English, and one thing I noticed amongst friends and people of my age group is that a lot of them can speak Telugu, but they cannot at all read or write Telugu. And I'm wondering what happens to a language then in terms, because you also spoke about language death, right? That's the one. I'm really wondering what happens to a language if you can only speak it, but there's very little reading or writing that's happening.
Well, actually, languages don't necessarily need a writing system, although a writing system, they say, locks the language. So in other words, it stops it from developing faster. I think if it's only a spoken language, then it will continue moving around. One problem, though, is that if you are in the modern world with iPhones and apps and spreadsheets and computer programming and so on and so forth, and you cannot discuss any of that in Telugu because you don't have the vocabulary, if that's the case, then it's a problem, because that's sort of what's happened to Advanitika. So Advanitika, the language in Greece, has hundreds of different words for sheep, because when you're a sheep farmer and you have 500 sheep, they're all different, and you look at them as different animals, not just one. It's useless if you just have one. So it's very complex in that direction, but you can't say very simple things. There's no word for electricity. There's no word, if we want to say electricity, we say it in Greek. And I've heard as well, when I hear Hindi particularly, and English, right? But maybe also with Telugu, it's like, I can understand a little bit because I hear English words. So I don't know if that is, if that becomes more and more and more, and Telugu is perceived as being useless because English is the language that is spoken everywhere and is so useful. If that's the perception, then I think it goes down a dangerous path. So I don't know if I'm being negative about that, but that seems to make sense. I don't know, how does everyone feel about that? Kind of shocking to say that, or?
I personally don't think it's very shocking. I'm just wondering how we can, at this point, kind of slow that process down, or kind of move away from there, from this process of it becoming.
But one of the wonderful things about Telugu is that you have, I don't know, 20 times more speakers than German? No? How many speakers are there of Telugu?
Yeah.
180 million. 180 million?
Yep.
So that's one good thing. But doesn't mean that it's safe, right? If suddenly everyone decides to drop it, or within a generation or two. In a best case scenario of language death, like that would be like Maori of New Zealand, which is a positive thing there is that the language basically is extinct, but people speak it at different levels from complete fluency, and everyone knows some of it. It's like maybe, I don't know what it would say in India, but let's say like in America, Spanish. You learn it in school. Some people speak it very well, but everyone knows a little bit of Spanish. So that's one way of trying to preserve something.
I also had another question, which is more related to your work with translations. I was wondering, because you know so many languages, and you're translated into so many different languages, I'm wondering at what point of learning a language do you actually feel confident enough to translate it?
Well, actually, as we were discussing earlier, my current projects in German and also in English are Grzegorz Kwiatkowski, who's a fascinating poet, and who insists that I translate him, says, "You are the only one who understands me," is what he says. Not quite that way, he's a little bit more elegant. But so my Polish is not very strong, but he's involved. I ask him questions, and I like his work. He's a fascinating poet, also very straightforward, very short, powerful. So I feel I can do that, but I wouldn't say that my Polish is strong. I shouldn't be translating it if that's the way that goes. Stronger languages are like Russian, German, which is my mother tongue. I also, initially when I was translating, was frightened of translating from German because I felt it was too close. But I got over that, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. Sorry, I thought we were leaving or something.
Does anyone else have
Hello. Yeah, in India, industry, we have people being multilingual state, country. We have teams who speak different languages. Out of compulsion because out of livelihood, because they go to different areas and it's very important for them to learn the language. But in your case, was it necessary for you to adapt to different civilians in different areas where you migrated? Or out of your own passion that you adapted, learned into many languages, including what is that? You also spoke about academy, that is the Urdu language. You have the connections with your cousin. So,
Yeah, well, actually, that's a fascinating point because it's. I think India has proven that in certain areas where people might speak 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 languages, that it is quite possible. In America, we have this idea that, and in Britain as well, that English is English, and if you know a second or a third language, it's very unusual. Now, so in my family situation, because my mother only spoke German and refused to speak anything else, I mean, that was one thing. Then in our village in Austria, we live on the borderland where they speak a Slavic language that is Benish. Well, it's like a type of Czech, really. So that was there. My grandparents spoke that. And they insisted that I speak that with them. So then in Greece, of course, outside in the street, it was Greek. In the British school, it had to be English, and yeah, beaten if one didn't. Yeah. And then later on, because we were sort of destitute in Greek, and at the international school, they said, if you have a scholarship, we would like you to do your classes in Russian or Vietnamese, in fact. And I've always wondered, had I chosen Vietnamese, what would have happened? It would have been a very interesting twist. But I chose Russian anyway. And so the schooling was mainly in Russian there. And then Afrikaans, which was also part of the curriculum in a strange way, because who would think that you'd have Afrikaans classes in Greece in a school like that? So it happened quite naturally, really. So it's I must say, the interest then stuck, and I wanted to develop these languages. But I think very much like in an Indian situation that you mentioned, when you, as a child, you have one grandmother who speaks Tamil, the other one Telugu, and then Marathi and Hindi and so on, and you're quite comfortable in all these languages. It's just a gift that the situation gives you. Yeah. So. Yeah.
So, I was related University of Hyderabad. So, I just want to know. So, there is a novel called Heads Up. I think you might have heard about as a novel of Saul Miller.
Yes.
So, there are writings like Heads Up and John Manson Gorgi wrote this novel. So, if we take novels like Heads Up, they Saul Miller writes in English, but in between he uses Latin sometimes, Greek sometimes he uses Sanskrit. But right now, if you are looking into the situation, the translator might be knowing only the target language. Maybe if I am doing Herzog novel in the Telugu, I'll be knowing English and Telugu. So how can I defend that novel? Because I don't know German, I don't know Italian. Some 4 or 5 languages he insists in the novel. So how can I defend it? How can I make that into Telugu?
Well, one question I would have: if you translate him into Telugu, would you want to keep some of that foreignness, or would you translate everything into Telugu?
Actually, when I felt reading, I want to do the complete work.
Yes.
So how can I mean, even letting, how to say, if I want to tell this, some phrase or some word, he brought up from another language.
Yes.
It's not from English. I want to insist that. But can I mention that, or to even mentioning also fine. But how can I translate that. Maybe if I am using Google Translate, it may show something different. Let's say I have searched for this FIFL, there is a German word, I think, FIFL, FIFL. But once I checked the meaning was different, it showed that first reader, the FIFL's word's meaning is first reader. Right now I'm finding some other meaning. So there are some clashes I'm finding in the language, other language. How can I correct this?
Well, so when I started translation and we had sort of typewriters and paper, and we would make lists of words and then go to the library, but that was in US. In Greece, we didn't have libraries, so that was, I mean, actually we didn't. You either had the book or you didn't, you either had the dictionary or you didn't. So there you would make lists of words, you'd use a rotary phone to call people and ask, what is this, what is that? I think that still is relevant today in the sense that you just need to do whatever you need to do in order to find out what these things are. Now, I mean, as a professor, I shouldn't say that, but there's ChatGPT, you know. If you sort of put that into and say, what is this? But of course, if you do that, ChatGPT, I must say, is getting better because we are forced at our universities. Initially, I was giving Fs to anyone who would translate, use that. Then now we're encouraged to teach people how to use it correctly and in an academic way. So probably I'll be teaching how to use ChatGPT in translation. This is my first announcement of that. I see lots of shocked faces. Anyway, now one thing with if you're going to do it from an academic perspective, if there's going to be some Yiddish or some German in Herzog, then you would want to double check. There's also Google, like to recheck and say, is this really this? Is it really that? And do research. So ChatGPT actually, in this case, could be like someone's German grandmother who can tell one, well, this is what it meant. And then you don't quite trust your grandmother, you double check a little bit further. But now the resources are amazing. And ultimately, as long as the end product is perfect as you can do it, I think that's something to consider. Although we're now in a state of flux because of AI, and the question is, where is that going to lead? I will say last week I had a dissertation which I ran through the AI. It said 98% AI generated, and which caused an issue. But I knew that the person had done all the scholarship, and it was not all the ideas, all the analysis, everything was of the student. But because the English was a bit difficult, they passed it through ChatGPT in order to fix it. And then now the system shows 100%, 98% AI created. So we're in this situation now where we don't quite know what to do. I don't think that was quite your question, but maybe part of it is an answer, as in how to do these things. We just need to figure out and be as cunning as possible as a translator to sort of figure out what to do, and also what your audience might want. Do you keep certain things? Would the American know what the ancient Greek or the German is? If you think they do, then you might need to fix that in Telugu as well, because you can't just say, well, in Telugu, I'll keep the Yiddish word. I'll say oi gewalt, which is the Yiddish for like, wow, how terrible. So if you're going to do that, nobody here will understand, so why would you want to do that, you see? Or you have a footnote. I don't know, in our culture in the United States, footnotes in novels are not encouraged. Publishers are not too happy about that. But maybe the publisher you'd work for would want that, so you could keep the Yiddish and then footnote it. It depends on your culture, your reader's culture. In other words, what they like, what they want to read. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. While reading German and government language, these people include Spanish.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While reading them, I faced this difficulty, so that's what I asked.
Ah, okay, great, yeah.
Some words, they fix in the sentence.
Like there are a number of words which Telugu have adopted from Urdu. So while we're speaking, it's a perfect sentence. Being a person from Hyderabad or Telangana, they don't differentiate. But when a non-Telangana person reading that, they find it's a difficult, they find it's not a Telugu. So when we translate in this multilingual sentence, so I believe that's what is questioning.
I see.
So he is saying, what is it you prefer? You want to keep the foreignness? You want to, or you want to?
We want to give the author authenticity. Author knows this much language and it's refers to be his style of writing. So
Yes.
there are writers in Telugu who makes both Urdu
అంటే ట్రాన్స్లేటర్ డెసిషన్ కూడా ఉంటుంది కదా.
like he said, like Atya Japan and who makes Spanish. So we want to get that flavor.
Yes.
This author writing style is mix of some of Spanish words or some of Latin or whatever the language is. In the English.
When you translate it into English.
Convey the same style in the targeted language which are translated.
Well, I mean that's a big question for translation studies, right? Like, do you foreignize? Do you domesticate? For 2,000 years in the West, since Jerome, people have been wondering what to do about these things. Like, do you mimic? So yes, you put in Spanish words. I'm not too happy about that though, because if you think about how British often translate dialect, Russian dialect, they say, well, it's Russian dialect, so let's do it Scottish in English. So suddenly you have the Russian villagers sounding like it's from Scotland. Oh, why, you know? Or you might have the Telugu poet who's mixing Urdu in English, suddenly sounding like he's from New Mexico, mixing Spanish and English, if that's what you meant.
Yes.
Like creating that foreign, like it's interesting. And one great thing I think about the modern translation scene in the last 5-10 years is that people become very daring and much more, the translator sort of takes agency and starts doing their own thing. Not my style, because I'm a bit more of a traditional type person, but I find it fascinating, like the new Wilson translation of the Odyssey of Homer, which does some very shocking things, but they're quite brilliant. And of course, she is a scholar of ancient Greek, so she knows what she's doing. They're not mistakes. That's another thing, maybe, that if you know what you're doing, and you're doing it for a certain reason, and you can stand behind that reason, then I think that's a useful passport to allow you to do that, you see?
We are seeing that in English translations from Indian languages. Even in Hakam, she have some Urdu words as it is.
In the recent Heart Clam,
Yes.
he kept some Urdu words
Yes.
in the translation, English
Yes.
translation.
Yes, well, that's a big question, of course, because Daisy Rockwell will say no, don't do that,
Yeah.
right? We don't want buy and kaka and this and that and all these words that will confuse the reader. It needs to be good prose. It needs to be understood, which is, I think, a very good ploy. And she got the big prize. But I know that in India, many people might also not be too happy about that. She's translating it into, is she appropriating it? I mean, I stand behind her, so I'm only asking the questions. I'm not criticizing her. Because I think I need to know what my readers want. Although this is maybe a very controversial thing I'm saying. I don't know. Because it's Indian literature. Should it be done as Western? Is the big question. Yeah. Does anyone have any ideas? Maybe I should ask you.
I think the issues are quite interesting. One is about the linguistic variety. So how do translators encourage the variety of language that is used in the text? So when a Hyderabadi writer writes, they write in a Telangana Telugu.
Yes.
Which according to some people will have some words from Urdu. That is one issue.
Yes.
The second issue is when the text itself has sentences from other language. Such an educated person in a Telugu novel might use English. So that's like Constantine's novel, where the educated people would use French. So how does that get translated into English? Is the question. I think these two have to be kept separate. And it also depends on if I want to bring the variety of Telugu in English, it's impossible. Because the kind of English that I know is a bookish English, which is actually studied in college. So I don't have knowledge of the varieties of English that is available to others. These are the issues one has to look at.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And actually, one thing that what you said makes me think about is if, let's say, if you have a dialogue, and it's a wonderful dialogue, a brilliant writer in Hyderabad, Telugu, and the people sound like they're from here and you believe it, and it's wonderful, and they're young, they're 20 years old, they're speaking this language. If you translate into English, why would you want to keep the Urdu words or the other things? Because if you translate into English, how about they sound like they are 20-year-old people speaking? Now, maybe not 20-year-old from Manhattan or from Brooklyn, like very, very specific, but that young, youthful way, because actually it's natural language using Urdu here. They don't use it to foreignize, right? It's just the way it is.
The way it is, yes.
So if that's the case, then now if it's done to foreignize in order to make the language strange, like maybe using Saul Bellow trying to shock or destabilize his readers a little bit, challenge the readers, unless it's natural. But if it's natural speech, if they suddenly use Yiddish expressions, which they would use, Yiddish being the German Jewish language spoken by many immigrants of his generation in America. So if they're Yiddishisms that are absolutely natural and it sounds like someone's grandmother, well then good, should be there too maybe. As an option, one thought of how to do it.
Yeah.
So, since you wanted to gather thoughts about what does one really do under such circumstances, Goethe Institute did a very wonderful project about 7-8 years ago, titled Poets Translating Poets.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware of that. And it was in the Indian context, German and different Indian languages. It's come out as a book as well. What was done was that, say in Telugu, when I was calling for Gujarati, which is my mother tongue, though I'm not very comfortable in it, but nonetheless, the task was for a person to translate from, say, Gujarati and actually transliterate, but not translate as the end product, but as a product that could make a German poet understand what the Gujarati poet is saying. And then the poet stopped. And then the German poet translated the Gujarati poetry, and this happened in Marathi and Telugu and Assamese and many others, Kannada. What happened then was that a new poem.
Yes.
And that was very interesting.
So it's creative translation, yes.
Because it was why it came from an original. There was dialogue between the two poets. And then it was recreated for the German readership. Because I think in this question, it's important for whom are you translating? And hence your question, should it be Western outcome? And if a Telugu translation is for a Telugu readership in the Telugu speaking spaces, then I think that has a very different.
Oh yes, absolutely. And I think even if it's for an Indian readership, which understands the culture, at least to some extent, which is why we were saying before that Penguin India or Hachette India will publish books that cannot be published by Penguin America because the readers cannot connect, whereas here they can, and they're major bestsellers and wonderful publications.
This was very interesting sort of project.
Yes.
I'll hand over that to you if I can. I don't know how long we're here still, but I can pass it on directly to you.
Thank you.
Hope that's come out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
It is something similar to what Hyderabad would do. He will take a Chinese poem and then put it in English without knowing much about the text.
Yes.
Or like Eliot, he
Yes.
writes his poem and puts in other languages without trying to explain it to the British audience.
Yes.
So we did this kind of experiment, again drawing from example. We put together Malayalam poets and Kannada poets together, and the Kannada poets don't know the Malayalam, and Malayalam poets don't know Kannada. We asked them to translate each other, and both of them are poets, no intermediaries. But those we said don't use English, they did use English to communicate, but they translated. None of them had translated earlier.
But did they ask each other, like, what does this mean?
Yeah,
What is that? They could.
They asked to read it again and again, to listen to the musicality of the poem.
Yes. Yeah, you see, I mean, this is what I was saying. These amazing new directions with new ideas of translation. Because when I started translating in the 70s and 1980s, things were they weren't as creative. I think in general, of course, there was Ezra Pound, there were people who were doing wild things, but it's become more of an institution now, I think, to open up and do things in different ways. More traditional, more mainstream, more creative. And the major presses will also publish that, which is good.
So when I read printed words on the page, I will not understand it. But when somebody reads it, I will be looking at their face, their body.
Yes.
The entire effect that the person who is explaining it to me, that communicates things to me. Not the words,
Yes.
but the body and the facial expression.
It's a full thing, yes. Yeah.
So translating in a oral way,
Yes.
not in a written way.
Does anyone, Amita, do you want to? Yeah, so,
This is Unleashed for knowledge for a lot of parts. And thank you for a very nice expose, a very nice dialogue that you conversed here. After having done a very large body of translations, you now are writing. Do you write as a writer? Do you write as a translator? Do you think about how this could be translated by somebody else, or would you translate your own word? What kind of a process did you go through as a writer?
I think I'd like to ask you Aruna's question, especially considering we are translating the Persian scribes into Telugu. As a translator and as a writer, what is your expectation? What are you thinking of? Just to kind of extend that question.
Well, okay, I'm a translator who's written a novel, and it was more of that quest that I mentioned a bit earlier, sort of to find out the inner workings of why things happened the way they did in my family. And when the novel was finished, I was quite satisfied, and that's it. I'm going back to translation. You suggested I do a memoir, which I was also thinking about, but it's a bit frightening. But I'm not mainly, I am a translator. In fact, if you say to me, Peter, you will never write another novel, I'm fine with that. So that's maybe a shocking thing to hear, because people do want to write. But I'm more interested in what other people are writing. So the novel has been translated into various languages, into Russian, which was interesting for me to read it, my words in Russian. And that made me wonder whether the translator in me had affected, because it sounded so familiar somehow, almost like that was the original and I'd done the translation. Strange, Greek as well. It just came out in Greek. And there, of course, because it is a very Greek book in many ways, that was a fascinating experience. It felt like it should have been written in Greek. Actually, I'm meandering a little bit. I don't know whether I'm touching on the. No, but I would say I'm a translator, not a writer. It's shocking. Yeah.
When you wrote, do you write as a writer or was
I felt I was translating myself somehow. I was translating something, yes. And that frightened me a little bit because I thought, oh, is this the wrong thing to be doing? But maybe it made the book strange and a bit unusual and untypical of what a novelist might do. So, I mean, it'd be fascinating to hear it read in Telugu. And that will be the first language that I couldn't connect to unless I try and learn the language so I can also.
No, who knows?
Maybe I will.
Next year when you come, probably you can start speaking in Telugu.
That could be an interesting reason to learn it, right? So I can read myself.
You can yourself translate it, is what he's saying, into Telugu.
I was going to suggest, because we didn't want to hear the audience's opinions on who should translate who, like when we were talking about
Yes.
the Dutch
Yes.
translated by an African Dutch woman instead of a white Dutch woman. And I was wondering if anyone has anything to add for that.
I mean, it could be thought as if, let's say you're a poet from Hyderabad who writes in Telugu, and you want an Indian writer to translate you, and you insist that that's the only thing. Is that a useful thought, do you think, or is that completely irrelevant?
I was thinking more on the lines of, which something that I personally struggle with. I'm aware that I come from a certain upper caste and it is really incorrect to translate the words for someone who's coming from a more lower caste background, because you cannot validate their experience through one lens. So I guess it's a similar conundrum, but it's not the same, but it's a similar conundrum, I guess.
Yes, it seems to run across very similar lines, like who can translate whom, right? But I think there is a movement, from what I've heard, in India where that's a lot of experimentation going on within the caste. I think the word is Dalit poetry, right? If that's the correct.
Dalit, yeah.
Yeah. And the questions of who's allowed to translate that, right? But isn't it really that if you understand the spirit of it and you're translating it into your language, let's say if it's from Marathi or into Telugu or into English, let's say, if you're a brilliant poet in the language and can recreate the translation, I would say that's the most important thing. Unless the argument is that you're not Dalit, you cannot understand it. And I don't know if that's true or not. It might be. But when Amanda Gorman insists that she wants an African writer to translate her into Greek, that just means that she's not aware of the fact that in many European countries, that's not the case. If she wanted that from a German translator, it could be done, but then again, it would be more to her advantage to have somebody with a lot of experience who understands her work and not just a race thing, is my advice. If she asked me my advice, I would say you should have somebody who is a master translator, like the Dutch woman you fired. Big mistake, big error, you know? Although maybe not, because it became a major scandal, and as I was saying, scandals in the press mean, so it was a good, her stance has been a good commercial move. Yeah.
This is in response to the discussion moving to, I think in the context of this, our black writers, there are three axes on which you can look at it. One is the ontological. Being a advocate, okay, right answer, that is more ontological. The other is, if that was the case, 30 years back, there are no Dalit translators who could translate from, let's say, Marathi or Kannada into English. It was a non-Dalit writers, translators, who translated these things and made Dalit writing visible. So in that sense, it's an historical question. But now, at this point of time, there are Dalits who know English. So, and if they are raising that issue as an ethical question, not as an rhetoric, I don't believe that I can't understand the reading and I can't translate. But if it's a politically charged issue, as an ethical issue, I should step aside
Yes.
and allow others to do it. So I don't believe in the ontology as an ontological issue. But as an ethical issue, yes. Another is a historical necessity. When nobody else is there, as you yourself asked me to talk, if African writing has to be translated into Telugu, where do you find an African who knows Telugu? That's the issue. So
Yes.
historical necessities, compulsions, and then the political ethical issues. But ontological, I don't think it was much order.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yep. Anyone else?
May I add to that? Yes. It's a very difficult issue. If a writer wants a particular person to translate, I think he or she has the right to get that. But as a reader, as a consumer of literature, I would say I would rather have access. And access which is not only physical access, but access linguistically. And if there is a black German writing, unless that black German happens to have grown up and has imbibed elements of that language, the translation is still not good enough for it to be read in a particular way by a German-speaking person. So these are very tricky issues. And however, at this moment, I think, and thankfully, we're beginning to acknowledge our translators, because that's another large area that is happening now. We did not have good translations. We had translations, but not good translations. Now, not only do we have good translators doing an excellent job, and hence we need to acknowledge them, and hence thank you for doing what you're doing, because you're really transposing a piece of literature, a piece of life, to another culture, to another readership. And this has to be, and that's what you are doing in your publication as well. But I think this is very crucial that we continue talking about different communities who want their works out there, and what are we able to render? It's very crucial that this dialogue continues. I know that particularly in Dalit poetry, they do not want, Dalit groups do not, there are some very outspoken people who say, no, you leave it alone. You haven't understood, you will not understand, and it has to be said in a particular way, and that's fine. That's fine, because I may not understand everything.
Does anybody else have any questions, remarks? Just for you to say something.
No, anyone else want to ask a question? I have one question. It just cropped up. Mirrored. Right.
You are the translator as well as professor of translation. In that context, I have a question. In an ideal world, theory influences practice, and the practice of translation should be informed by the other way around also. In your 40 years of experience as a translator, have you seen any changes where the theory did really influence the practice of translation in your own work? Do you ever go in your translation decisions that you make? Do you ever go, oh, this is what I have to do? And then it clearly says something else, and then you change the decision.
Well, actually, what an interesting question, because I was always frightened of theory before I became a professor, which was 10 years ago, almost exactly. And you will notice that many of the major theoreticians in translation, that's the right word, translation theorists, anyway, they do not necessarily practice, and many of the major translators will have nothing to do with theory. So it seems to be almost like two different worlds often. So I have found that, and in my teaching translation, I try to teach theory in a gentle way and in a useful, practical way. So, when we look at what, if we're looking at German theory like Schleiermacher, for instance, might say, the simple ideas of do we bring the audience to the work or the work to the audience, for instance, that can be a useful thought just when you're trying to figure out like what you're doing. But what could be worrying would be to start, as you're translating, to cramp your style and say, oh, is Derrida looking over my shoulder? What am I doing? Is this fine? Or, try to think of Walter Benjamin while you're translating. So, if you can use these incredible thoughts and studies that major intellectuals over the centuries really have done and make not only decisions, but maybe understand what you're doing and why you want to do it, that can be helpful. Also, if you study things like culture reams, for instance, like these elements of culture, like when I translate, what do I do? Do I say Don Quixote or Sir Quixote or Mr. Quixote, Don? Do I do this? Do I do that? Little thoughts like that. How do I bring cultural things that maybe only somebody from Hyderabad would know what to do? Things like that can be quite helpful, I think, when you look at what theorists have discussed. So I'm all for theory, but with care, not to have it shackle or handcuff you and not allow you to express yourself. One has to be free and creative, but it's good to have it. Maybe a little bit like classical ballet dancing, years and years of study, and then you let go, but it still has to be correct, you see, thinking.
Thank you.